The year is 1979. The place is Germany. But Germany is not one big country. Oh no, it is cut in two pieces. On one side there is West Germany. It is free and rich. On the other side there is East Germany. It is controlled by the Soviet Union. It is strict. It is gray. And between them there is a border. It has a big wall, angry dogs, and soldiers with guns. The soldiers have one job. They stop people from leaving. Two friends lived in East Germany. Their names were Peter Strelzik and Gunther Wetzel. They had wives and little children. Peter and Gunther were tired. They did not like the strict rules. They wanted to buy bananas, read any book, and say what they wanted. They wanted to go to the West. But crossing the border was very dangerous. If you ran, the soldiers would shoot. Not good. Peter and Gunther needed a plan. They sat down and thought. Peter said, "Maybe we can dig a tunnel?" Gunther said, "No, the ground is too hard." Peter said, "Maybe we can build a boat?" Gunther said, "No, we live far from the sea." They felt sad. It seemed impossible. Then they saw something on TV. It was a program about hot air balloons. They saw a big, beautiful balloon flying high in the sky. It went over trees and houses. Suddenly, Peter had a light bulb moment. He looked at Gunther. "The soldiers watch the ground," he said. "They do not look at the sky." Gunther's eyes went wide. "A balloon?" he asked. "That is crazy." "Yes," said Peter. "But it might work." They decided to do it. They would fly over the wall. But they could not buy a balloon at the store. That was suspicious. The police would arrest them immediately. So they had to make the balloon themselves. They needed to build a giant flying machine inside their houses, and nobody could know about it. First, they needed cloth, a lot of cloth. But they had a problem. They could not walk into a shop and say, "Hello, please give me 800 meters of cloth." The shopkeeper would ask, "Why?" If they said, "To fly away," the shopkeeper would call the police. That is a big red flag. So the two friends played a clever game. They drove to a town far away. They bought a small amount of cloth. They told the shopkeeper, "We are making a tent for camping." The shopkeeper smiled and sold it to them. Then they drove to a different town. They bought more cloth. This time they said, "We are making covers for our car." They visited many shops in many different towns. They bought blue cloth, green cloth, and yellow cloth. They bought every color they could find. Finally, they had a mountain of fabric. Now the hard work started. They took the cloth to Gunther's house. They went to the room under the roof. It was small and hot. Gunther had an old sewing machine. It was slow. It was loud. Click, clack, click, click-clack. For weeks, the families worked together. The men cut the cloth. The wives sewed the pieces together. Sew, sew, sew. It was boring, and their fingers hurt. But they had to be careful. They were afraid the neighbors would hear the machine. "What is that noise?" a neighbor might ask. "Oh, nothing. Just fixing some pants," they would say. They knew the truth. If the police found the cloth, the families would go to prison for a long time. It was a very scary secret. Next, they needed a basket for the people. They did not have wood or wicker. So they used simple metal and clotheslines. They built a small, square box. It looked very uncomfortable. 4 adults and 4 children had to fit inside. It was going to be a tight squeeze. Finally, they needed fire. A hot air balloon needs hot air to rise. Peter was good with machines. He built a special burner. He used gas bottles from the kitchen. He turned it on to test it. Whoosh! A giant flame shot out. It was loud. It was hot. It looked like a dragon. "Is this safe?" Gunther asked. Peter looked at the fire. "I hope so," he said. After many long nights, the balloon was finished. It was huge. It was ugly. It looked like a giant bag of colorful trash. But to Peter and Gunther, it looked like freedom. They packed everything into their cars. They were ready to fly. One night, the families drove to a dark field in the forest. It was time. They took the big pile of cloth out of the car. But nature was not their friend. The weather was bad. It was cold and damp. The grass was wet with dew. The cloth touched the grass and got wet. Then it started to rain a little. This was a disaster. Dry cloth is light. Wet cloth is heavy. Very, very heavy. Peter turned on the burner anyway. Whoosh! The fire roared. The balloon filled with hot air. It stood up. It was huge. The 2 families climbed into the small metal basket. The balloon lifted off the ground. "We are flying," Peter whispered. But they were not flying well. The balloon was too heavy. It went up, but then it stopped. It entered a cold cloud. The wet cloth became even heavier. Suddenly, the balloon started to fall. "Hold on!" Gunther yelled. They fell fast. Thump! They hit the ground hard. It was scary. They climbed out of the basket quickly. It was dark and silent. Where were they? Were they free? They walked quietly through the trees to check. Then they saw a sign. It was a German sign, but it was an East German sign. Their faces turned white. They were still in the East. They were very close to the border, but on the wrong side. This was the worst possible place to be. The guards were near. The dogs were near. "Run!" Peter whispered. They could not take the heavy balloon. It was too big to carry. They had to leave it there in the bushes. They ran back to their cars. They drove home very, very fast. Back in their houses, they did not sleep. They were terrified. The balloon was lying in the field near the border. In the morning, the soldiers would find it. The soldiers would see the gas bottles. They would see the cloth. They would know someone tried to escape. The police would start looking for them. They would look for people who bought a lot of cloth. "We have a big problem," Peter said. "The police are coming." They could not give up now. They had to try again. But this time they had to be faster than the police. The police found the old balloon in the bushes. They put pictures of it in the newspaper. They asked, "Who built this?" Peter and Günther saw the newspaper and sweated. The police were investigating. They were checking shops that sold cloth. The families knew the police would find them soon. They had two choices. Choice A: wait for the police and go to prison for a very long time. Choice B: build a new balloon immediately and fly away. They chose choice B. They had to work fast, very fast. They went to different shops and bought huge rolls of cloth. They did not care about the colors anymore. They sewed day and night. They barely slept. Fear gave them energy. In just a few weeks, they finished a new balloon. It was much bigger than the first one. It was a monster. On September 16th, the wind was perfect. It blew toward the west. The families drove to a field. They set up the burner. Whoosh! The fire roared. The giant balloon filled with hot air and stood up. It was twice as big as the first one. All 8 people climbed into the basket. Peter cut the ropes. They shot up into the sky. They flew higher and higher. It was very cold. But suddenly, they saw bright lights below. Searchlights. The soldiers were scanning the sky. The families held their breath. If the soldiers saw the balloon, they would shoot. "Be quiet," Peter whispered. Luckily, the balloon went up fast. It went into the clouds. The lights could not find them. They were safe from the guns. But now they had a new problem. The fire went out. "The gas is empty," Peter said. They were 2,000 meters in the air. Now they were falling. The balloon came down fast. It fell through the clouds. It hit some trees. Crunch. Then it hit the ground hard. They climbed out of the basket. Their legs were shaking. It was dark and silent. They did not know where they were. Was this the west? Or was it still the east? If they were in the east, the police would catch them in 5 minutes. They walked to a road. They saw a police car coming. They were terrified. The car stopped, and a policeman got out. Peter walked up to him. He was very scared. He asked, "Excuse me, are we in the West?" The policeman looked at the tired, dirty man. He looked at the strange balloon in the trees. The policeman smiled. "Yes," he said, "you are in West Germany." The families screamed with joy. They hugged each other. They cried happy tears. It was a miracle. They defeated the wall, the soldiers, and the strict laws. And they did it with a sewing machine and a bag of hot air. They were finally free.